Germain. Explanation of meaning of higher knowledge of the science of man, Part 2. Violinio Germain. May you come to recognize me, Dak Noe, Cum Eta, Di Ino, Di Dak, of the Brotherhood, of the Council of the highest order of the heavens, who have come forth with special purpose of the light and all from the Father. I am all Dai Pa, Dai Cum, Omni, one that walks in oneness with the Spirit, that is the Spirit which is God and greater than the universal. I am Germain, in service unto the one living God. Since becoming aware of God's presence within you is the highest goal any man can attain, and all can attain it in the measure of their depth of desire for its attainment, let us get on with how to and why. Material and objective teaching through the senses do not give knowledge, for the senses cannot acquire knowledge. Intensive reasoning is not intensive thinking, for when people reason through sense observation, they are but repeating brain memories. Any product of man resulting from the assemblage of sense memories is not a creation of mind. It is an accumulation of plagiarism, such as an automobile and most of your world products. These are inventions of generations of sense observers and are forever changing by being added to by others. Mind creations of a Shakespeare, a Beethoven, or a Leonardo are not made that way. Creations of the mind endure. They cannot be changed or added to by others, and yet even those great genius minds will say that, if they saw further, it was because they stood on the shoulders of giants come before them. Knowledge cannot be obtained through sensed observations. One can merely be informed of effect of motion in that manner. Information is not knowledge, even if it will help to make a better television or jet plane. Reasoning from such sense conclusions misleads one into forming baseless theories and postulates which have no resemblance to nature whatsoever. That is what is the matter with science today. Well, it is one of the things. It is composed of hundreds of theories and postulates which will not only not fit together in one consistent whole, but many contradict each other. That is also what is the matter with your civilization as a whole. Its educational ideal is to stress the physical and ignore the moral and spiritual. Your entire educational system stultifies the genius who is born with higher knowledge, and many parents of genius children weep because of being thus afflicted. That is also why the conclusions of mathematics are unreliable. This explanation is necessary for you and other enlightened ones in order to transform you into a higher stage of your unfolding. It is necessary for you to realize that your civilization is still in its intellectual and spiritual infancy. It is still hard bound by inherited doctrines and barbarian practices of man exploiting and man killing. Man is still too near the dawn of consciousness which released him from his jungle days of universal fear to make much progress toward universal love by the unfoldment of his spiritual and intellectual nature. It is these very practices, doctrines and beliefs which are driving the thousands of more advanced seekers like you to escape from their traditional inherited bondage of orthodoxy, superstition and worship of the miraculous. Likewise, it is these many thousands like you who will become the seed for saving the world. This we can know because of the hundreds of Keelers who say that they have searched from cult to cult and from leader to leader for decades without finding that which they sought. Many have even been misguided into seeking it emotionally and have suffered the frustrations resulting from the emptiness which follows any other than an inspirational mental approach. It is this agony of not knowing just what one seeks and just where to find it, and not knowing what higher knowledge means, that is so disturbing to these many thousands whom God has finally awakened into an awareness of His presence within them. But next we hear, okay, already I know that much, but how do I get the rest of the way? The gratifying thing, Keelers, is that if you are seeking truth, when you find this material, you know this is it. You recognize it at once. The explanation for is the fact that only illuminates can bring that higher knowledge to another which they alone possess, and that other must be ready for it before he can even slightly comprehend it. But we are getting there, for many are now ready. It is even more strange that we can tell it to you, for all down through the ages the illumined ones have been unable to tell to others incomprehensible words that which was so clear to them. This you know without question. For ages the great leader mystics have told of the divided and the undivided, without the slightest success in giving the real meaning of those words to man. The brilliant thinking of a century of scientists has never even remotely connected those words of the mystics, the divided and the undivided, with the universal zero fulcrum of mind and light waves which emerge from it. As far back as the Bhagavad-Gita, you have been explicitly informed of that light which is God, without having conveyed any meaning to man during all these eons. You were also told God is light and God is love. Man has interpreted His words as meaning the incandescence of suns, and has built an objective God of limited form while still teaching an omnipresent one. The time is now close, however, when man will discover and comprehend that man's self is as formless and non-objective as is God. Now, aren't you glad you stuck with us? We have such a grand and wondrous experience to share as we walk right within the hall of God. Little scribe, thank you. As with the first recognition of Aton, have you worked to bring the word, and yet without the explanation in understanding behind the word. Man only turns the enlightened away and crucifies them. Little scribe, old and ancient friend, thank you. All of this which we have herein written is for the purpose of telling you that man first unfolds his physical nature during the eons of body forming. His spiritual, mental and inspirational nature began its unfolding at the dawn of consciousness, which was less than 10,000 years ago. If you accept the findings of authorities on the subject, it matters not. Some place it as 8,000 years. From that point of view, it is quite wonderful that the human race has advanced even so far as it has in mental unfolding, even though it is still quite barbarian in its practices and in its beliefs, for man still kills and preys upon his neighbour more than ever in history, and he still believes in a brutal God of wrath instead of a God of love and justice. As long as man kills his own brothers by millions, instead of loving and serving his brother as himself, man will be thus. Also, man will still retain his lesser status as long as he believes it possible that he can sin against God and be punished by God for this sinning against his own self. God needs not punish you. You do that nicely for yourself. There are the things which should be taken into consideration by higher educational and religious institutions, for it is the lack of the right kind of educational teaching and the right kind of religious beliefs that is holding mankind back in the dark ages of ignorance. It has never been easy to come into truth from finding that the earth is not the center of your solar system to free electricity. The ones who control the masses make sure the information is kept from you. Your Emerson expressed it very well, this primal condition of present-day civilization. We think our civilization is near its meridian, but we are yet only at the cock crowing and the morning star. In our barbarous society, the emergence of character is in its infancy. This is not to be wondered at in a civilization which does not make character growth a part of its educational program, and does, in fact, program the students to have less and less good character. These things and more you must come to now know in order that you can better comprehend the chaotic world situation of today, which has been heading toward another dark age period for some 3/4 of a century now. This present fall of man is the harvest he is reaping for the 7,000 years of piracy in national and personal empire and fortune building. The entire of the world is in the horrendous reaping of that which has been sown in greed and absence of God. And so we have been warning you of this decline of man for many, many years, and has explained it as the workings of God's law which will not let man keep that which he has taken from another, and will not allow happiness and prosperity to come to any man or nation who has taken happiness and prosperity from another for himself or itself. For many centuries, one part of the world has endeavoured to enslave the other parts of it. The strong have overpowered the weak, and the weak slave has grown strong enough to slay the master. That is what Nazism is. That is what communism is. The mighty nations of the earth have created Nazism and communism and socialism and Zionism to fulfill the law of equal reaction for every action. Impoverished and debt-ridden, tax-burdened nations do not realize that communism, for instance, is but a mirrored reflection of piracy and a natural consequence of it. We will dwell upon this subject only long enough to say that these present decades are a focusing point where the repercussions of centuries of man's ignorance of his own spiritual nature are coming to a head. These are the years when man must decide which way he will head for the future without the possible annihilation of the greater portion of the race through atomic war, or a decline of a major part of it into the dark and a renaissance of a minor part of it to a high cosmic level of civilization beyond what man has ever known. The few who may possibly survive such an Armageddon will give rebirth to the race to keep the light of love ever illumined, even as the saints and monks of past ages preserved the wisdom of past ages by hiding it in monasteries and caves until world rebirth brought them from their centuries of hiding. History ever repeats itself, but each repetition brings man ever nearer to God. We are facing that kind of transition right now, and our message to man is an endeavour to sufficiently awaken the whole intellectual world to that higher spiritual knowledge which unfolds the light of genius in man. Higher knowledge of your universe, which creates cosmic thinkers, is the only remedy for transforming this unhappy kind of world you now experience into one which is founded upon unity in the brotherhood of man. These seem to be very hard words. So, likewise, do the words of the surgeon seems to be hard words when he tells a man that his knife must cut the entire cancer out lest the man perish. Your entire civilization is cancerous, and you have been commanded to be the surgeon whose first duty is to tell his patient of his ills and the remedy for them in order to avoid death. This long prelude to the principles of higher knowledge for man has been necessary, for what you are about to read is very new thinking, to which only the one out of many is attuned. All who read what now follows will better comprehend the reason for the dreadful state in which humanity now wallows. Can anyone who has the courage to look at this civilization of yours squarely in the face say that the world is united into one brotherhood of men who love and serve each other? Can you actually say that this is the same goal as is offered through the New World One World Order, who plans to enslave the masses, terminate millions and rule through elite horror? Also, can one rightly say that man's love of culture and ethical practices indicates that he has arrived at a high state of intelligence? Does the display of homosexual rape and incest in your art galleries and the hard metal rock music that lauds Satan and evil show growth into deserving fulfillment within the higher cultures of the cosmic and universe? Following this thought a bit further, who dares with honesty to affirm that the might override survival of the fittest principle of the jungle has become obsolete because of the higher educational and spiritual unfoldment of the godlike men of today? Before answering this question, look well to the east and to the west around your globe. Look well upon the practices of mass slavery and subjugation of the spirit of man in war-desiring nations. Look even more carefully at peace-desiring nations who are spending untold billions for protections against enemy nations, only to find the enemy has eaten your soul from within. Look still deeper into the hearts of the peace-loving nations who fear their enemies, and ascertain whether they did not themselves create their enemies by being their enemies. Also, ask deadly enemies why they become friends with their deadly enemies when other deadly enemies threaten both. Go look yourself in the face in your mirror and see what is really staring back at you. Does that which you see bring joy or pain to your conscience? We are painting a word picture of the kind of world mankind has created by its thinking thrust into action. As man becomes what he thinks, so likewise does a world of men become what a world thinks. Is this a true picture, or is it not? If it is a true picture, what right have you to feel that you are a highly civilized, highly advanced and cultured people? And what right have you to assume that your civilized world teachings are right teachings? A highly cultured, intelligent civilization would be a peaceful and happy one, where each man's first consideration would be the welfare of every other man. Is your world that kind of world? It would be a world where human values would be first in every man's heart and material values only incidental to them. Love would be its dominant note instead of greed. Friendliness would be universal instead of enmity. Unity would bind all men together instead of universal disunity in every one of man's essential institutions. Is this present world that kind of world? Everyone who reads and or hears these words knows full well that every high ideal which you have cherished as a hope for a peaceful world of love has been shattered by man himself, until there is but one way of saving the entire human race from another plunge into the dark, and that one way is for man to become aware of his own divinity by finding the God of love seated upon his throne of heaven within every man, and discard forever the vengeful God of wrath whom the great masses expect to see coming in a chariot from out of the clouds. God will work with you, but not for you. The Christ will again come to earth in the Christ consciousness within every man, and that coming shall be from the kingdom of heaven within man, which all men will some day recognize and comprehend. Christ is not going to come in a flaming cloud as you are told will happen, to rapture away the myriads of those who wash themselves in the blood of man you murdered 2,000 years ago. Christ will not come in a flaming chariot, one tiny spot in this whole world of tens of thousands of cities and towns, and tens of billions of other worlds of many towns and cities whose people have never heard of Christ, but have undoubtedly heard similar divine messenger Christ-conscious teachers. It is time to ask of yourself, in your own heart, where man can really find an omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient God. And it is the first obligation of every learned man and institution of learning to help man find that God of love, where the greatest teachers of the world have taught man to find him. But guess how the hosts plan to approach your hot little planet? What a lovely experience to anticipate. So let us leave this Dharma, for it has been indeed a very long day. We will take up with a discussion of what is higher knowledge when we sit to write again. I am Germain, Phoenix Journal 35, The Sacred Spirit Within. Mitaka Ye, Oyasin.